Today I will be teaching on how to write well. This is a skill that often isn't taught until the collegiate level, and even then, unless you take a class on various types of composition, you may still find yourself without the ability. If you were unable to attend college, most high school students graduate without sufficient writing instruction. This is due to the fact that the classes are so large and that one teacher cannot give essential or sufficient feedback for 30 students. If they tried to do that, they would probably be working 80 hours a week. For this reason, students aren't required to write more than a few essays in a semester, which cannot establish the necessary identity as a writer. Despite the current generation priding themselves in being more educated than the former ones, the average person has lost almost all writing skills, and I will explain later why I think this is. Thus, I find there are two types of people: those who believe their writing is pure gold, when in fact it's akin to a decent rough draft, while the other type avoids writing at all costs. I will go through the practices that I think everyone would benefit from, whether it's writing an email or a sermon, telling a story, sending a newsletter, or something more official like an opinion piece for a newspaper. So what's the best way to become excellent at writing? All great writers do one thing well. Writers read. Read everything. Read things that challenge you, read things that don't. Read in the morning, at lunch, before bed. Read while you're waiting for your dentist appointment, rather than scrolling on your phone. Read aloud stories to your children and your spouse with a candlelight in the evening. Sometimes in order to go forward, we have to go back. Read 3 books at once, one nonfiction, one fiction, one of short stories or poems or essays. Read the greats throughout history. Read recent Pulitzer Prize winners. Read something funny and share it with a friend. Read something that makes you lament and reflect. Read a book written for children, one for young adults, one for married, one for parents, one for the dying. Reread a book you used to love. Challenge yourself and figure out how many books you can read in a month, in a year. Write each title down and brag about it to your friends. Now I want to answer the question, why were former generations better at writing than we are now? The answer is that we've stopped reading. In the current age, we read short news articles, watch short videos or documentaries. We gain information from 20-second TikTok videos and reels, graphically designed images. We have lost our endurance to read substantial texts, and our attention span is nil compared to former generations. In fact, even while I'm talking, you may find yourself bored because I don't have any graphics or any background music going on. I'm just talking to you for about 20 minutes. So, my question is it unholy for Christians to enjoy this part of our fast-growing, technologically savvy culture? Not necessarily. But it is not necessarily holy either. We have to look at the fruit it bears. Let's talk about each night before we fall asleep, because this is a habit all humans share. If I frequently choose to watch Netflix, scroll on my phone, curate my social media account, what will the fruit of my life be? If I read a novel to my children, then read a chapter of my British murder mystery novel, and then turn off the lamp and sleep, what will the fruit of my life be? Well, this last month, my husband Cash and I tried this very experiment. We eliminated screens before bed. During the day, we eliminated almost all social media and stopped looking things up on our phone. If we needed to look at social media or look something up, we saved it for the laptop only. We put our phones away for meals. We put our phones away for time spent with our children, while working or doing chores, and we're driving. We made all of our entertainment and leisure time from books, board games, card games, outdoor activities like biking and swimming. So what happened in that month? The first few days really felt like a drug addict trying to quit cold turkey. I craved it and itched to pull and refresh for a hit of social media dopamine. But after a few days, I was getting the greatest sleep of my life. A week later, I had more bandwidth for patience with my children. I listened better to my kids and to my friends and Cash. I looked people in the eyes. I felt more sensitive to the emotional needs of the people around me. I felt free. My attention span grew. I planned my day better. My house was cleaner, so I felt less stressed. I walked our dog more. I used my bike for the first time in a year. I planned and prepared our homeschool year. I read 3 different books this month. I felt like I had an abundance of self-control. I even decided to give up sugar for a while and eat more whole foods. I woke up earlier and found myself studying Colossians and Galatians between 5 and 6 a.m., a time I would normally be sleeping. So this video isn't about healthy screen usage. Sorry for that rabbit trail, but I can't talk about writing and therefore reading without addressing the giant elephant in the room. If you want to become better at writing, you have to look at where your idle time is spent, on your phone or in a book. If you are curious about this screen health topic, I highly recommend the book The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. But to summarize this point, read, and never stop. The next few topics I will discuss are techniques rather than recommendations, like the formal one. I call this technique the less than or more than technique, and so you might find yourself imagining elementary math and from your youth and imagine these 2 symbols. When you are writing a story, you can begin with a small detail and describe it getting bigger and bigger and bigger until we, the reader, are finally in the setting you want us to be in. Or you can do the opposite. You can start in a large setting and slowly get smaller until we arrive at our main character. Imagine the zoom function on a camera. You could start small and zoom out, or you could start huge and zoom in. I like this technique because it gives me direction and functions as an outline to begin a story. Pretty soon here I will read you a story that I wrote for this video. I use this technique by starting large scale, by sharing the year, and then I slowly zoom in smaller and smaller until I'm at a story in my mother's life. Another technique, which you could argue is the most important, is called show, not tell. This implies when you are writing, your goal is to show your reader the landscape, the conflict, the details without telling them. For example, in the story I'm about to share, I'm describing a mother who is busy raising children and cooking. But instead of saying she's busy in the kitchen, I write stirring a pot of chili for the masses, cornbread in the oven, a dirty apron, reprimanding sons for swearing at the table, for their boots and their arm wrestling. All of a sudden, we have a picture of why the mother is busy, an image of the kitchen, a backstory that her sons are naughty, that she's always working. Part of showing, not telling, is replacing boring verbs for more descriptive ones. For example, instead of yelling, using the word shrieking. One is more intense, desperate even. Part of using descriptive verbs is not using adverbs. For example, instead of saying she yelled loudly, you could say she shrieked. Another way is using metaphors or similes in the story. In the story I'm about to write, I said her sister's curls are the color of sunlight. I could say she was blonde, but that would be telling you rather than showing you. There are many resources for explaining more how to do this, but the best way is to read. You'll notice that good writers are always showing rather than telling. Another technique, and one of my favorites, is using allegory. An allegory is creating layers within your text, characters, events, symbols that all reveal a deeper meaning. Maybe the most famous allegories are Pilgrim's Progress or The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. However, when I use allegory or symbols like this, I try to be a bit more discreet than these texts. For example, in the story I'm about to read, about a little girl who's my mother gets her foot stuck under a horse's hoof. However, I hope you can pick up on deeper themes or allegory about injustice, about men being favored over women, about girls being judged more harshly than boys, and about the power of a single generation following God. Lastly, this technique I will share is about balance. So when you write, you want to be concise without any nonsense or unnecessary words. However, I also like to include what I call rabbit trails in my writing. But you might think, wait, rabbit trails are the opposite of being concise. But I like to create rabbit trails while I'm writing to further deepen and expand the story in which my writing takes place. For example, in the story I'm about to read, I talk about my mother's mother, my grandmother, leaving for days at a time, fed up with everybody. This seemingly isn't connected to the story, but it is. We can infer that the family isn't always happy. There may be marriage strife. The mother maybe has mental illness. The mother is struggling. The balance of this technique is that you want to share details or rabbit trails that have a reason for being there, such as if I shared that her grandpa wore zebra socks. Might be true in the world you're creating, that you're writing about, but it isn't relevant for these characters. The other side of that coin of rabbit trails is being concise. So when I'm editing, a lot of times I am just cutting, not adding. I want to make sure every word belongs there. I'm not trying to write something flowery. I'm trying to write something powerful, a story that could change the world. Flowery language has no place in this type of writing. You're not making long sentences or adding adjectives just for the sake of trying to sound creative. You're using powerful words and making sure all the words belong. I hope these thoughts and techniques helped you. I want to share the story I wrote now. It's 1963, and my mother is 4 years old. This is her earliest memory. She's outside playing on her family's farm. The sun is setting. It's spring. The sky is warm and the air is warm. She opens the gate to the family horse to brush him. His name is Colonel. He's a massive 8-year-old Palomino. He's as golden as my mother's sister's hair. Even at this tender age, she's terribly jealous of her sister's curls, which are the color of sunlight. The ground is wet like it is in spring. Her bare feet squish in the mud as she brushes his hocks and his flanks. She's done this 100 times. But all of a sudden, he shifts his weight, lifts a hoof, and lands on her foot. 1,000 pounds of weight begins to imprint on her delicate 4-year-old foot. She screams, pounds her tiny fists in his pure muscle leg, but he doesn't seem to notice. She tries to wriggle her foot free, but any movement pushes her foot deeper in the mud. She shrieks, first for her mom, then her dad, then her 4 older brothers and sisters, even for her younger baby brother. No one comes. No one answers. The horizontal sky is silent. Her foot sinks further, his hoof pushing hers down to some unearthed portion of hell, the mud creaking up to her ankle. She is sure now it's broken. She screams, her head flung backward, face to the sky. Tears streak down her dirty face. She screams for all the pain she's seen in her short life. The rain not falling on the crops, her brothers drinking and smoking, shaming their family, her mother leaving for days at a time, fed up with her life on the farm. Now she believes that she will die out here next to this demon horse. What feels like hours pass. All hope is gone. The horse's fateful leg is covered in her tears. She has none left. It feels like the weight of God's judgment has found her, the gavel forever nailing her to the land. Until at last, Colonel casually shifts his weight again, lifts his hoof off her foot, and she's free. She stumbles out of the enclosure into safety to inspect the damage. She is able to walk, so it must not be broken, but there's a giant purple hoof print covering her foot, broken blood vessels around the edges of the print. She runs inside to tell her mom, her family. They are sitting around a 100-year-old table eating. They had not noticed she was gone. There are just too many to notice. She cries out to tell them her tale, her heroics, her strength, how it petered out in the end, but she is free now and has the wound to prove it. But the retribution continues, and they don't believe her. She frantically describes in details the events of the hour before, and the more frantic she gets, the more callous and apathetic they become. He might have stepped on you for a moment, but if it had been any longer than that, your foot would be mangled. That's enough crying now. You're going to make yourself sick. Sit down and eat. Colonel would never do that. As soon as you pushed on him, he would move. She runs to her upstairs bedroom crying, her verdict decided beyond a reasonable doubt. But I wish I could go back there to be her mother. stirring a pot of chili for the masses, cornbread in the oven, a dirty apron. I would reprimand those sons for swearing at the table and for their dirty boots and arm wrestling. When she came in, I would respond because I would see it in her face. I would see everything. The pain, the fear, the loneliness, the isolating judgment would all be in the blotchy spots and swollen eyes, dirt-streaked face with tears. I would pick her up and hold her. I'd ask her to take me outside and show me what happened. While I would be gone, the cornbread would burn, the chili stick to the bottom of the pot, but my daughter would know she was worth it. I'd hold her hand as we walked to the barn. We'd take our time. Her small limp would prompt me to pick her up again. She would point out Colonel and the depression in the ground where she was stuck. She would tell me how scared she was, how alone, and how no one came. I would kiss her bruised foot and tell her I was sorry that happened to her. I would tell her that she wasn't alone now, that I would always believe her and that it wasn't her fault. I would be the mother that she always was to me. I would be the mother she taught me to be.